Thank you very much. So my name is Richard Ford, and I'm the CTO for Integrity 360. It's great to have a great venue, although I've mixed emotions about the venue. Great when we have security first. Every other time I've been here is to see England get trounced in the last game of the Six Nations, so not so great memories there. But it's great to see everybody here in such a packed room. Ronan brought up the agenda, and we've got a packed agenda of quality talks, quality panels, and as we've talked about, it's a very entertaining Q&A session at the end that there'll be a chance to grab a beer to sit down and watch that at the time. But this year, with that packed agenda, I've been relegated to a supporting act this year, so I'll pop up a few times between panels and talks. My job today this morning is really just to introduce that theme, as Ronan said, and really talk about why we think that exposure, resilience, and impact to AI are the three hot topics in the industry for us and for our customers and for organizations around Europe. Before I jump into that, what I'd like to do is just really start carrying that introduction to integrity and how we engage with our customers. And the place I always like to talk about this every year, because this is kind of really sets the stand for how integrity engages, how we view security, how when we bring people into the business, we talk them through the approach to security as a mature approach that's cyclical in nature to make sure that we're constantly building and enhancing the security posture of our customers. And for us, that's with our security first model. So we built the security first model, and then we start our security first conferences, which is, I think, this is Ronan said the third. Actually, I think it might be the fourth one we've held at the Aviva here over the last few years. And really, this model, as I say, is how we engage with our customers. And we always start with the top left portion of this of the security first donut or wheel, which is really around identifying and assessing. So what we like to do, particularly when we're engaging with customers for the first time, is to help them through this process. We think it's extremely important that if you're going to build an effective security posture, you need to understand exactly what you're securing, what's important to you, but also those threats that you're facing. So identifying and assessing your assets, understanding where your data is, what needs to be protected, what threats you're facing. And then only when you have a full understanding of all of those items can you actually decide how you're going to secure those. Without that, then you're just, and what we quite often we engage with customers, we look at what they've got a plethora of technologies that are implemented for different reasons, but actually they're not meeting any of their key challenges. So it's really being able to guide how we're using that security budget to be most effective. So once we understand our threats and what's really important to us, we then need to think about actually how do we protect and prevent anything happening to those assets, to that data, to our operations in our business. And that really brings on to the next part. So using that information to guide our strategy, our approach to protecting what's important to us, preventing attacks. Now, unfortunately, we can spend all the money in the world and all the time. We can build our walls as hard as we want to build them, but as we see in the media constantly, there is that arms race, and there'll always be somebody who's got a ladder. If they're persistent enough, they'll put enough rungs on that ladder to go over that wall we've built, or they'll find they've got a spade and they can dig under, and our foundations weren't quite there. So we need to then think about, we need to do everything we can to protect our organization, our assets, our data, our processes, our operations, but also be in a position and being mature in our approach to say that's not always going to be 100% certain that's going to happen. There will be mistakes, there will be exposures and vulnerabilities that will get exploited, and we'll come on to that in a second. So we need to make sure that we have an ability, a process, the people, the technology in place to detect and analyze that activity when it happens. So be able to identify something malicious has happened, something's penetrated those preventative and protective controls that we've put in place, and now we can respond to that because we've identified it. We can understand whether that's a real threat or not, be able to prioritize it, and then move into the next stage. We say, we've got a threat we've got to deal with, so now we need to respond and recover. So be able to have a process, having, again, the people, the process, the technology. And that's something that you'll hear across the day repeated, those three things that we need to cover adequately across the pieces: people, process, and technology, not ignoring any elements of those. And technology will change, and we'll need to adapt to that. But having those in place so that we can very, very quickly respond to an incident so that we are minimizing the impact of that, which then aids the recovery process. And then even if we find that we've got something that's very impactful, the most important thing, and when we sit down with, when I sit down with you guys, with Patrick Ragg, and we look at some of our IR examples, we can really see where that comes into play in being able to respond quickly and having a very clear plan of who does what to be able to recover. but get into that. So that's our security first model, and all of those learnings feed in and we work around. That's the way we like to engage with our customers, on that constant circular process to enhance and better the security posture of our customers, to enable them to protect that important data, assets, processes, and operations. So with that out of the way, we'll talk about why. Why exposure, resilience, and the AI impact as our topic. As Rona said, last year, visibility was our topic. We looked, and the year before that, it was really around how do we come out of the pandemic, looking at hybrid working and how we respond to that. But last year, we looked at visibility because we saw there's a very clear shift in how we deliver IT, how IT is delivered, consumed, and actually security hadn't, and the visibility hadn't moved with that. So it was looking at how we can adapt to enhance that. When we look at this year, we look at actually what are the top topics for customers? Well, it's exposure, so how are we exposed? It's the resilience, so how do we build that resilience into our organizations? And then we cannot ignore, and as Anya talked about, as one of those transformational technologies, we can't ignore the impact of AI. And actually, we're going to touch upon that in a few different ways as well, not just purely from the threat and cybersecurity perspective as well. But I'll come on to that. So we just dive down to a little bit of detail in each one of those, and I just put a little bit more meat on the bone of why they're important. And what I'd like to do is start with a definition for exposure. So I've consulted the Oxford Dictionary and pulled out what they see as their definition for exposure. I think it's important for us to look at this. So they're saying the one, it is the state of having no protection to something harmful. So that really echoes to, do we understand what we have, and are we protecting that adequately overall? And do we understand, if we look at that harmful piece, do we understand what threats that we need to be looking at to be able to guide us on where we need to be providing that protection? Because if we don't understand those two, then it's going to be very difficult for us to minimize that exposure. The other half of it is the thing that we definitely don't want to happen. So if we're not doing number one well, then we're in the position where that exposure is going to be the revelation of something secret, especially embarrassing or damaging, particularly customer contact details or beyond. That's what we see. And again, when we sit down with Patrick, we can look at how that information is being used to extort and pull the levers on different organizations. So we see that as being hugely important to organizations. And if we just look at exposure, what are the challenges that people are facing? Well, there's the continued cloud adoption and that relentless adoption of cloud and all types of cloud, whether it's public cloud infrastructure, that not a single customer I talk to now is just in Azure, just in AWS, just in GCP. They're in all of them. But it's also their SaaS products as well. So the uptake of SaaS is huge. I think it's something around 80% of applications now are all SaaS-based, probably even higher now, I should imagine. It's also shadow IT. A lot of customer conversations I've had recently, they've called that out as one of their big challenges. It's individual business units going and having the ability to go and invest in platforms that are in the cloud that actually IT and security have no idea about, and that's data walking out of the organization up into somebody else's cloud platform and infrastructure. So do we understand how secure that is? Thinking about that supplier management as well. There's also legacy platforms. Again, as we talked through with Patrick around IR, this comes up over and over again. Forgotten legacy platforms, unpatched platforms, leading to exposures that are being exploited by attackers. And then also, lastly, it's that growth in vulnerabilities. And actually, if we look at that, we have one of our big challenges is that we have a very narrow view of what exposures is, thinking about it in terms of CVEs. Now, Brian's going to come up next and really sort of open our eyes up to actually, there's a much bigger exposure gap that we need to think about. And really the result there is we have unknown or unquantified exposure, or where it is known, what we find with a lot of customers feeding back is that the inability to be able to actually keep on top of all of those, prioritize and actually make an impact, an effect, and reduce their exposure. So that's exposure. So that's our first topic. Topic number two, and again, we've gone to a definition. I've not stuck with Oxford. We've gone for the Cambridge definition this time for resilience. And if we look at that, we see that two parts to that, two sides of the resilience coin that we think is really important. And one is that capacity to withstand difficulties, toughness, and that's really building that resilience into our organizations across people, process, technology, so that we can withstand attack, that we can stand up to the threats that we're facing overall. But there's also the other flip side of resilience is the ability to bounce back, which, as I said, talking through that kind of respond and recover element of our security first model is critically important. Yes, we need to be able to withstand an attack, but importantly, we need to be able to bounce back in the face of adversity and get back to that previous good condition. So something really important for organizations to look at. And actually, the reason why it's a hot topic for us, resilience is seen as, it's really the cornerstone of the digital-first world. So, being able to, maintaining those operations in the face of adversity, should I say. And actually, regulation is coming into play that is driving this for many sectors. So we have DORA and we have NIS2, so DORA for financial services, which has a wider impact, and we'll touch upon that later in a panel to look at the implications of that, the wider implications, but also why it's important to all organizations. And NIS2 obviously looking at critical national infrastructure. How do we build that resilience in? And that's to say that resilience isn't just, we're going to have two of everything. So we've got high availability. It's resilience of process, the resilience to withstand an attack, and with the ability to bounce back. So what do we need to be doing? We need to be looking at and architecting resilience to attack into our infrastructure to make sure we've got the controls. Yes, we need to have that, that classic resilience in terms of looking at the CIA, look at the availability and maintain that availability, but it's also about how do we engineer and architect the security resilience into it. It's minimizing the impacts, so that's having our controls, being able to respond and recover extremely quickly, and also having a clear and tested path to recovery, which is extremely important. So probably some of the more important takeaways just from my little small session here is making sure that we're doing all of these and we have them in place currently. And then lastly, just our last topic, and it's impossible to ignore, as I said, sort of this huge topic. And I think it's for us, and hopefully throughout the conference, we can start distilling, if we look at the AI impact, the impact that AI is going to have on us, we need to be able to judge between, looking at the hype, looking at our hope, and then looking at the reality of it, because all of those things will come into play, but not all of them are going to line up. And if we look at it right now, my view, and we'll see differing views, I think Ian's on shortly after Brian from Checkpoint is going to talk us through that AI war and bring to light Checkpoint's views and his views on the impact of AI. But from my position and my view right now, I think there's a lot of hype in the market. There's hype from an attacker's point of view that we're going to end up in a situation where we're constantly being hit by self-learning malware and ransomware, which I think is a little bit out of fantasy and science fiction. But there's also hype, or maybe hope, when we look at the defender's point of view, that actually we're either not going to be needed and we can be on a beach putting our feet up because there's some AI that's going to look after it, or that we're not going to need, or our job is going to get increasingly easier. What actually I think is going to mean is that we're going to be able to just do more, and I think that's the power of AI. But we're going to touch upon that as we go throughout the conference. So lastly, just before I hand over to my colleague Brian, he's going to talk us through that exposure piece in detail. Just really wanted to just reflect back to where I started on the security first model and really looking at actually how do those topics really map to it. So really when we're looking at exposure, what are we talking about? We're talking about that identify and assess, understanding where we are, what we need to protect. That's understanding those exposures, but how are we going to mitigate those exposures between our controls, whether it's just patching, whether it's configuration, or putting specific controls in place, so protecting and preventing. When we look at resilience, we see that across pretty much the entire model. Making sure that we're putting resilience in to defend ourselves from attack, to be able to identify and assess extremely quickly, to be in a position to respond, and then respond and recovering extremely quickly. And our challenge, and one of the things that we're hoping that we'll convey throughout the day and have meaningful conversations on, is looking at how the AI can impact that positively. Yes, there's a threat from AI, and we'll talk about that throughout the day, but there's also a positive impact and a positive side to AI, and how can we embrace that as part of our organization, as part of our security programs, and as part of our security operations. So that was it from me, just to introduce our subject there, and I will hand over to my colleague Brian. Thank you very much. I hope you have a great conference.